Year as well, like the previous years, we had 27 questions on English. And compared to the previous year's paper, this year's paper was a bit more difficult, in fact. Now, a bit more difficult than the previous year's paper. We'll go for discussion of Set B paper. Now, I'll read the questions on paper because I feel more comfortable reading on paper than reading on screen. Anyway, you may read along with me on the screen. As I said, we had, as you know, we had 27 questions on English. We'll go for discussion of those questions. Right? We had questions on different types this year. Inferential questions were there. Assumption-based questions were there. Main idea questions were there. Questions based on suggestion were there. Some miscellaneous questions were there. Right? We'll go for discussion of those questions anyway. Now, this year, the passages were not that long. We came across short passages. And sometimes, as you know, short passages are much trickier than long ones. We may come across some confusing options. For some of the questions, you might have come across some confusing options. Anyway, we'll go for discussion of those, of all the questions. The first one, the first passage is followed by two questions. One is a miscellaneous one. The other one is an assumption-based one. We'll go for the paragraph. The history of science is a real history of mankind. In this striking epigram, now we need to focus on indicators while reading, we need to focus on pronouns while reading, we need to understand the meaning of every sentence as well. In fact, based on the question, understand which type of question it is, and then we have to answer accordingly. The history of science is a real history of mankind. In this striking epigram, a 19th century writer links science with its background. Like most epigrams, so here this epigram is being compared with other epigrams. Like most epigrams, its power lies in emphasizing by contrast an aspect of truth which may be easily overlooked. In this case, it is easy to overlook the relations between science and mankind and to treat the former as some abstract third party which can sometimes be praised for its beneficial influences, but frequently and conveniently blamed for the horrors of war. The former here refers to the science, and the latter here refers to mankind. Science and mankind cannot be divorced from time to time at men's convenience, yet is a contrast indicator. Right? Focus, we need to give utmost importance to indicators while reading. Yet, we have seen that in spite of countless opportunities of improvement, the opening years of the present period of civilization have been dominated by international conflict. Is this the inevitable result of the progress of science, or does the fault lie elsewhere? So this paragraph ends with a question. The author poses a question to his readers, in fact. Come to the first question following this passage. Which of the following is so are emphatically conveyed by the author of the passage? It's a miscellaneous one. In fact, we can take it as an inferential question. Which of the following is so are emphatically conveyed by the author of the passage? Now I've given you a list of some extreme words and all. Right? The option that we select as the answer, in the case of an inferential one, must be there in the passage. Nothing in any option must go beyond the passage. The meaning should remain the same no matter what. Come to the first statement. Without science, mankind could not have continued. Without science, mankind could not have continued. Just wait a minute. Without science, mankind could not have continued to exist till today. So what statement one tells us is that without science, this action could not have happened. Mankind could not have continued to exist till today. Come to the passage, right? This part of the passage, the one that starts with, in this case. Fine. I'll just read this part again. In this case, it is easy to overlook the relations between science and mankind and to treat the former as some abstract third party. That means science is being treated as an abstract third party, which can sometimes be praised for its beneficial influences, but contrast indicator. So science can sometimes be praised for its beneficial influences, right? And to treat the former and to treat the former as some abstract third party which can sometimes be praised for its beneficial influences. So science can sometimes be praised for its beneficial influences, but is a contrast indicator, but frequently and conveniently blamed for the horrors of war. Statement 1 says, without science, mankind could not have continued to excel till today. So in this context, could not becomes an extreme word. So based on that, we should conclude or infer that, we should conclude that statement 1 cannot be inferred, 1 should be eliminated. So A and C are gone. Come to statement 2. It is the science that will ultimately determine the destiny of mankind. Now, ultimately is also an extreme word, right? It is a science that will ultimately determine the destiny of mankind. Come to the passage once again. The part that starts with science and mankind. Science and mankind cannot be divorced from time to time at men's convenience, right? Yet is a contrast indicator. So this part contradicts the part that comes before it. Yet we have seen that in spite of countless opportunities of improvement, the opening years of the present period of civilization have been dominated by international conflict. One says, it is a science that will ultimately determine the destiny of mankind. We have two contradicting ideas here. Statement 2 cannot be inferred from the paragraph. 2 must also be eliminated. The answer is option D, neither one, not. The verbal logic questions don't have any specific answer. It's not like mathematics that we apply the equations or formula and get only one answer, right? Verbal logic questions may have different answers. It depends on our understanding of the passage and how we move to the options and see whether that particular piece of information given in every option is in the passage or not. Depends on every person's understanding of the passage given and understanding of the mean and understanding of every option. Come to the second question following this passage. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. This is an assumption-based question. So here, the question is not asking us to assume based on any specific topic, right? So we need to assume based on the last part of the paragraph. In fact, we should start assuming once a person completes what he has to say. If the question asks us to assume based on a particular topic, then our focus must be on the sentence that talks about the topic, and we have to assume based on that particular topic, that particular sentence. We need to understand what the idea in that sentence is. That idea must be there in the option, and some piece of information must go beyond the paragraph. Here the question doesn't ask us to assume based on any specific topic. So we need to assume based on the last part of the paragraph. Statement 1 says, the horrors of modern life are the inevitable result of the progress of science. Come to the last part of the paragraph. I'll just read the last part once again. I'll go for a sentence starting with yet. Yet we have seen that in spite of countless opportunities of improvement, the opening years of the present period of civilization have been dominated by international conflict. Is this the inevitable result of the progress of science, or does the fault lie elsewhere? Now, in the last sentence of the paragraph, we have a pronoun, this. Now, you know the concept of pronoun antecedent. Every pronoun must refer to a noun before it. As you know, a singular pronoun can refer only to a singular noun, and a plural pronoun can refer only to a plural noun. The last sentence contains a pronoun, this. So to get to know to which noun the pronoun this refers, we need to focus on the sentence coming immediately before it, the last but one sentence. I'll read the last but one sentence once again. Yet, we have seen that in spite of countless opportunities of improvement, the opening years of the present period of civilization have been dominated by international conflict, right? The present period of civilization have been dominated by international conflict. Is this the inevitable result? So what is the inevitable result here actually? The present period of civilization being dominated by international conflict, this is the inevitable conflict. I'm not saying this is inevitable conflict. The last sentence is a question, right? It's asked, the question is being asked to us by the author. Is this the inevitable result of the progress of science, or does the fault lie elsewhere? So there's a doubt actually. The question the author asks us whether this one, the present period of civilization being dominated by international conflict, whether this is the inevitable result of progress or progress of science, or does the fault lie elsewhere? This is the last part of the paragraph. Come to statement 1 once again. The horrors, so we need the ID in the last part to be there in the option. The horrors of modern life are the inevitable result of the progress of science. Now what does option 1, statement 1 tell us? Statement 1 tells us that the horrors of modern life are the inevitable result of the progress of science. Whereas the last part of the sentence is doubt. And the ID in the last part, now assumptions can be facts as well as doubts. But the ID in the last part must be there in the option. The horrors of modern life are the inevitable result of the progress of science. This is not being talked as the inevitable result of the progress of science in the last part of the paragraph. The ideas are completely different. One should not be considered. Based on that, A and C are eliminated. Come to statement 2. The aspect of truth likely to be overlooked. This is a doubt. Assumptions can be facts as well as doubts. The aspect of truth likely to be overlooked is that science is what man has made it, right? The aspect of truth likely to be overlooked is that. So what the aspect of truth that is being overlooked is, that's likely to be overlooked is, science is what man has made it. This is the aspect of truth that is likely to be overlooked. Come to the last part of the paragraph once again. The last part says, science and mankind cannot be divorced from time to time at men's convenience. Yet is a contrast indicator. This part contradicts this part. We have seen that. We refers to everyone, general, right? We have seen that in spite of countless opportunities of improvement. So who has the opportunities here? Men. We have the opportunities here for improvement. The opening years of the present period of civilization have been dominated by international regime. That means science can be what man has made it, right? Because everything depends on the activities of man. Men had countless opportunities of improvement. The opening years of the present period of civilization have been dominated by international conflicts. This is what men have done. Is this the inevitable result of the progress of science, or does the fault lie elsewhere? Statement 2 says, the aspect of truth likely to be overlooked is that science is what man has made it. This can be assumed from the last part of the paragraph. B should be considered. The answer is option B only. Come to the next one. We have only one question following this passage. So I'll read the question first so that we can read the passage accordingly. When we meet other people while we travel, we learn to differentiate between what? This is a miscellaneous question, right? So in the case of miscellaneous question, we don't know how the question appears. We need to understand what exactly the question wants us to find out. And accordingly, we need to move to the options. When we meet other people while we travel, we learn to differentiate between which of the following. This is what the question wants us to find out. Fine. Come to the paragraph. We'll read the paragraph. Only with long experience. Only is an extreme word, in fact. Only with long experience and opening of his wares on many a beach where his language is not spoken, will the merchant come to know the worth of what he carries and what is parochial and what is universal in his choice. So, with long experience and opening of his wares on many a beach where his language is not spoken, a merchant can come to know the worth of what he carries. That means the worth of his values, and what is parochial. Parochial means like local, we can say. What is parochial and what is universal in his choice. It means what's the difference between what is parochial and what is universal in his choice. Such delicate goods, such delicate goods as justice. So these are like examples, in fact. Justice, love and honor, courtesy, and indeed all the things we care for are valid everywhere. It means all these, what we care for, are valid everywhere, but is a contrast indicator. But they are variously molded. They, a plural pronoun, must refer to a plural noun. They, the pronoun they refers to all these, what is mentioned here, right? Justice, love and honor, courtesy, and indeed all the things we care for. So all these are valid everywhere, but they're variously molded and often differently handled, and sometimes nearly unrecognizable if you meet them in a foreign land. It means all these are what we know, in fact. But if we meet them in a foreign land, they'll be unrecognizable to us. If you meet them in a foreign land, and the art of learning fundamental common values is perhaps the greatest gain of travel. Means what the greatest gain of travel is. What perhaps, doubtful, it's a doubt. What perhaps the greatest gain of travel is, and the art of learning fundamental common values. The art of learning fundamental common values. This is perhaps the greatest gain of travel to those who wish to live at ease among their fellows. So for those who wish to live at ease among their fellows, the greatest gain of travel is the art of learning fundamental common values. So our values and others' values remain the same. But when you go to a foreign land, the same values may seem to be unrecognizable to us. So if you want to get the greatest gain of travel, which perhaps would be the greatest art of learning fundamental common values, this is perhaps the greatest gain of travel to those who wish to live at ease among their fellows. The question is, when we meet other people while we travel, we'll learn to differentiate between what? The whole paragraph talks about values. Values remain the same, but those values, even though we have the same values, those values may seem to be unrecognizable to us when we meet them in a foreign land. The whole paragraph talks about getting to know about values, right, and realizing our values in a foreign land as well. Come to option A. This is what we gain when we travel and meet other people. Imagination and understanding. Imagination is nowhere talked about in the paragraph. So this goes beyond the paragraph. Nothing should go beyond the paragraph in the case of such a question. In the case of such a question, so A is eliminated. Communities and nationalities. Now, it is not talked about there in the paragraph that we'll learn to differentiate between communities and nationalities anywhere in the paragraph. P is also eliminated. Come to C. Local values and universal values. The paragraph talks about recognizing values. And the first sentence of the paragraph says, will the merchant come to know the worth in the sense, the value of what he carries and what is parochial, local, and what is universal in his choice, right? So we learn to differentiate between local values and universal values. And the whole paragraph talks about values. C must be considered. Come to option D. Friends and foes, enemies are nowhere talked about in the paragraph. D is gone, the answer must be option C. Fine. Come to the next question. Oh, sorry. One more question is there following this passage. This is an assumption-based question. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. An assumption-based question. Come to statement 1. So here too, the question doesn't ask us to assume based on any particular topic. So we need to focus on the last part of the paragraph. Travel leads to an understanding of humans, right? The last part of the paragraph says, the last sentence of the paragraph is a very long one. The last sentence, in fact, there are only 2 sentences in this paragraph, right? The former one, the latter one. The second sentence starts with such, and it is a long sentence, in fact. And the whole sentence is positively charged, right? We've all read it. The whole sentence is positively charged. Now here, such delicate goods are just as all these things, these values, but is a contrast indicator. So in a way, the second part contradicts the first part, but they variously molded. The second part in a way contradicts the first part. Even though the values remain the same, those values are variously molded. So these two ideas contradict each other. They variously molded and often differently handled, and sometimes support indicator, positive, positive, sometimes nearly unrecognizable if you meet them in a foreign land. And the art of learning fundamental common values is perhaps the greatest gain of those who gain of travel to those who wish to live at ease among their fellows. Now the paragraph, in a way, the whole paragraph must be taken as positively charged, even though some contradicting ideas are there. Come to the first statement once again. The paragraph talks about, in fact, the last part of the paragraph talks about what we gain if we travel and what we have to do to understand local values and universal values. Statement 1, travel leads to an understanding of humans. The last part of the paragraph says, and the art of learning fundamental common values. Fundamental common values is perhaps the greatest gain of travel to those who wish to live at ease among their fellows. That means travel leads to an understanding of humans. And if you have to learn their values, first you should learn them. So this one, a bit of understanding of humans goes a bit beyond the paragraph. The whole paragraph talks about travel. The paragraph talks about learning or trying to understand human values. And to understand human values, first we should understand humans. So this is what we can assume from the last part. One must be considered. Based on that, option B is eliminated. Now to statement 2. Travel helps those who wish to learn fundamental common values, right? Now, statement 2 is framed like a fact or a doubt. Travel helps those who wish to learn fundamental common values. There's no word in statement 2 telling us that it is a doubt. Statement 2 is framed like a fact. Travel helps those who wish to learn fundamental common values. The same idea is talked about in the last part of the paragraph, right? It says, the art of learning fundamental common values is perhaps, this is a doubt, is perhaps the greatest gain of travel to those who wish to live at ease among their fellows. Almost the same idea is there. But the thing is, in the paragraph, the same idea is framed like a doubt. In statement 2, the same idea is framed like a fact, right? In the paragraph, it is given as a doubt. We are assuming it as a fact. Assumptions can be facts as well as doubts. In the case of an inferential question, in the paragraph, if it is a fact, in the option also it must be a fact. In the paragraph, if it is a doubt, in the option also it must be a doubt. That means in the case of an inferential question, our task is to find out an option that is there in the paragraph, right? As it is. The same idea must be there, but will not be expressed using the same words. The same idea will be expressed using different words in different ways actually. In the case of assumption-based questions, right? In the paragraph, if it is a doubt, assumption can be doubt as well as a fact. Same is the case. In the paragraph, if it is a fact, assumption can be fact as well as a doubt. In the paragraph, it is framed like a doubt. Statement 2 is framed like a fact. That means we are assuming it as a fact. 2 also must be considered. Based on that, option C is eliminated. Come to statement 3. A person with long experience in travel can resolve differences amongst people. Now here we need to assume based on the details given in the paragraph. Nowhere in the paragraph we have mentioned about resolving differences among people. So this is not at all based on the content of the paragraph. 3 should be eliminated. The answer must be option A, only 1 and 2. Fine. Come to the next one. This passage 2 is followed by 2 questions. One is an assumption-based one. The other one is a main idea one. Fine. I'll read the paragraph. Now, question number 11, this one. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. So this is an assumption-based question. Anyway, we'll read the paragraph. By the time, we have one more question following this passage. It's a main idea question. Central idea Which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? Main idea, central idea, crux, title, theme, all these words, summary, all these words mean the same. We just need to identify the topic being described in the paragraph. That means the one on which we have majority of details in the paragraph. That one must be that is the main idea in fact. So we'll read the paragraph, we'll identify a topic on which we have majority of details, then we'll try to solve this question first, the main idea one first, then we'll move to the assumption-based question. Fine. You may read the paragraph along with me. We'll identify the topic being described in the paragraph. By the time children reach class 8, the bulk of them tend to be in the age range of 13 years to 15 years. But a contradiction is there. But in our country, about a quarter of all children in class 8 struggle with reading simple text, and more than half are still unable to do basic mathematical operations like division. Because even though they're in class 8, they are unable to read simple text, and they're unable to solve basic arithmetic operations like division. Every year, about 25 million young boys and girls from elementary school move into their life that lies for them beyond compulsory schooling. That means they need to be capable enough, right, to get adjusted to or to succeed in their life. They cannot enter the workforce, at least in the organized sector, till they are 18. For many families, these children are the first from their families even to get this far in school. Parents and children expect that such graduates from school will go on to high school and college. Right? The paragraph talks about the expectation of the children and the expectation of the parents. Parents and children expect that such graduates from school will go on to high school and college. Hardly anyone wants to go back to agriculture. That means they want to go to high school, they want to go to college. Hardly anyone means, in fact, no one, very few. Very few want to go back to agriculture. On the other hand, contradiction. On the other hand is a contrast indicator. On the other hand, abilities in terms of academic competencies are far lower than they should be even based on curricular expectations of class 8. That means even though the children don't want to go back to agriculture, they are not able to reach where they want to reach. Right? This is what the whole paragraph tells us. So the whole paragraph tells us about the expectations of parents and children and what they want to be, and being not able to be where they want to be because they don't have the abilities to reach their destination. This is what the whole paragraph talks about. Come to question number, the second question following this passage. Which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? Main idea question. Come to option A. Total eradication of poverty in the country will resolve the issue of underperformance of our school children. This is a main idea question. This is not an assumption-based question. Poverty is nowhere talked about in the paragraph. This one goes beyond the paragraph. A is eliminated. Come to option B. Monetary incentives. You know what monetary means. Monetary incentives to parents and teachers is a strategy to improve the children's academic performance. Monetary incentives, this term doesn't find mention in the paragraph. B should also not be considered. B is gone. Come to C. Public policy should ensure that competencies and achievements of young people. Competencies refers to the ability to reach their destination or their goal. And achievements of young people, what they want to achieve, achievements of young people are aligned with their expectations. The paragraph tells us about what parents and children expect, their abilities to do or to reach their destination, and their expectations as well. So option C talks about the idea being explained or described in the paragraph. C must be considered. Leave it there. We have one more option to think about. Come to D. India is not going to take advantage of the demographic dividend unless some school pass-outs go back to agriculture. The paragraph tells us that people, hardly anyone wants to go back to agriculture. That means, in fact, no one wants to go back to agriculture. India is not going to take advantage of the demographic dividend unless some pass outs go back to agriculture. In a way, this one contradicts the paragraph, and this extreme word should not be agreed to. D is gone, the answer must be option C. Fine. This is the second question following this passage. The first question following the same passage is an assumption-based one. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. We'll focus on the last part of the paragraph. The last part of the paragraph says, hardly anyone wants to go back to agriculture. On the other hand, contradiction. Abilities in terms of academic competencies are far lower than they should be, even based on curricular expectations of class 8. This is what the idea in the last part of the paragraph is. Fine. Come to option statement 1. For effective school education, parents have greater role than the governments. The idea in the last part is not mentioned there in statement 1. One should not be considered as an assumption based on this paragraph. One should be eliminated. Based on that, A and C are gone. Come to statement 2. School curriculum that conforms to today. Conforms means gets adjusted to, right? Gets molded accordingly, School curriculum that conforms to today's requirements and is uniform for the entire country may address the issues brought out. No issues are being talked about in the last part of the paragraph. And school curriculum that conforms to today's requirements and is uniform for the entire country may address. This part doesn't go with the paragraph at all. So 2 also should not be considered. The answer must be option D, either one, not 2. Fine. Come to the next one. The next passage is followed by just one question. So we'll read the question first, understand which type of question it is, and we'll read the paragraph accordingly. Which one of the following statements best reflects the thinking of the author about the science? This is a miscellaneous question, right? The question wants us to find out, an option tells us the thinking of the author's thinking about the science. Fine. So we'll understand what the author thinks about the science. Come to the paragraph. Paragraph says, we take it for granted that science has a social responsibility. The question wants us to find out the author's thinking about the science. Fine. The author is a speaker here. So when the author says we, when the author uses the word or the pronoun we, is the author included in it or not? Of course. If I say we are in an auditorium, it means that I am also in an auditorium. I can use the word we only if I am included in it. So we, in the sense, the author is included. We want to know the author's thinking about the science. We take it for granted now that science has a social responsibility. So this is the thinking of the author as well. The idea would not have occurred, a specific idea. There is a different article taken as specific. What is the idea here? That science has a social responsibility. This is the idea. The idea would not have occurred to Newton or Galileo. That means they might not have thought about this. They in the sense, Newton and Galileo, we can say. They thought of science as an account of the world as it is, and the only responsibility, right, an extreme word, and the only responsibility that they acknowledged was to tell the truth. This is what Newton and Galileo thought of science, that it is an account of the world as it is, and the only responsibility is that responsibility was to tell the truth. This is what Newton and Galileo thought. The idea that science is a social enterprise, the first idea. It has a social responsibility. The author's idea as well. The idea that science is a social enterprise is modern. Newton and Galileo did not think about it. Newton or Galileo didn't think about it. The idea that science is a social enterprise is modern, and it begins at the Industrial Revolution. That means this idea that Science is a social enterprise. Science has social responsibility. Science is a social enterprise. This idea began at the Industrial Revolution. Since the time of the Industrial Revolution, it has been taken this way, taken for granted this way. We are surprised that, we in the sense, the author is also included, we are surprised that we cannot trace a social sense further back. That means before the Industrial Revolution, we cannot trace a social sense to science, in fact. A social sense further back because Venus. Because is a cause and effect indicator. It must connect a reason and a result, right? The first one is this idea is a result. This idea is the reason. We are surprised that we cannot trace a social sense further back because we nurse the illusion that the Industrial Revolution ended a golden age, right? I mean, since the time of the Industrial Revolution, it has been taken for granted that science has social responsibility. So the author, in a way, supports the thought that science must be related to truth. Science must have a social responsibility as well, right? Fine. Come to option A. Science must value the commitment of the scientist. Science should value the commitment of the scientist is not being thought about by the author in the passage. So A is eliminated. Come to B. Science is a product of civilized society. Science is a product of civilized society and must be used for promotion of scientific awareness in people. Science being a product of civilized society is not a part of the details given in the paragraph, so it cannot be the author's thought about science as well. So B is eliminated. Come to C. You may be confused between C and D. Come to option C. Industrial Revolution was made possible by the advancements in science, right? Industrial Revolution was made possible by the advancements in science. The paragraph tells us that since the time of the Industrial Revolution, it has been taken for granted that science has a social responsibility, that science is a social enterprise. So this has been taken for granted since the Industrial Revolution. It doesn't mean that Industrial Revolution was made possible by the advancement in science. The meanings are completely different. I don't agree to statement C. I go for option D. Come to D. Science must pursue truth, but be responsible for social welfare, right? Now here, we have two contradicting ideas in the paragraph. One is science be telling the truth. The other one is science having some social responsibility. And both are being talked about by the author in the paragraph. In the last paragraph, he has gone for these two, and they connected these two ideas using a causative indicator because, right? So science must pursue truth, but be responsible for social welfare. Both are being talked about by the author in the paragraph as his thoughts of science, and both find mention option D. We'll go for option D as yes. Fine. Come to the next one. The next passage is followed by two questions. One is an inferential question, and the other is an assumption question. So we have two questions following this passage. Fine. In the case of an inferential question, we need an option that's there in the paragraph, right? Assumption means, as you know, something must go beyond the paragraph. We'll read the paragraph together. Today, if we consider cities such as is the same as example. Today, if we consider cities such as New York, London, and Paris as some of the most iconic cities in the world, it is because, it means considering these cities as some of the most iconic cities in the world. It is a pronoun, the concept of pronoun I understand. It is because plans carrying a heavy systems approach were imposed on their precincts. There refers to the city's precincts, fine? Districts and all, some parts of the city and all. The backbone of the systems theory is a process of translating social, spatial, and cultural desirables into mathematical models using computing, statistics, optimization, and algorithmic way of formulating and solving problems. The early universities of the West, which began to train professionals in planning, spawned some of the most ingenious planners. Ingenious is the same as genius. The early universities of the West, which began to train professionals in planning, spawned some of the most ingenious planners who were experts in these domains. This was because this is a pronoun, right? Pronoun this refers to what is mentioned in a sentence coming immediately before this one. Spawned some of the most ingenious planners who were experts in these domains. This was because these very subjects were absorbed into the planning curriculum that had its roots in the social sciences, geography, and architecture. Planning in India and its education differ from the West. So, planning in India and education in India differ from what is there in the West. And what is talked about regarding what is there in the West is something positive, right? We have planners there, trained professionals there, and because of them, the indigenous professionals, the early University of the West began to train professionals who were experts in these domains. This was because these very subjects were absorbed in the planning curriculum that had its roots in the social sciences, geography, and architecture. So what is talked about regarding what is there in the West is positive. Planning in India, education in India differ from what is or are there in the West. Come to question number, the first question following this passage. Which one of the following statements best reflects the most logical and rational inference that can be made from the above passage? Come to option A. Curriculum for urban planning courses should have diverse and interdisciplinary approach, right? Curriculum for urban planning courses should have diverse and interdisciplinary approach. The paragraph says, it is because it refers to these cities being considered as some of the most iconic cities in the world. It is because plans carrying a heavy systems approach were imposed on their precincts. Fine. Same paragraph, the next sentence. The backbone of the systems here is the approach of transferring social, leave that. The early University of the West, which began to train professionals in planning, spawned some of the most ingenious planners who were experts in these domains. This was because, again, a cause and effect indicator, these very subjects were absorbed into the planning curriculum that had its roots in social sciences, geography, and architecture. Come to option A once again. Curriculum for urban planning courses should have diverse and interdisciplinary approach. Positively charged. A is also the paragraph is also positively charged. A must be considered. Fine. Leave it there for the time being. Come to option B. In India, city administration is under bureaucracy, which lacks formal training in urban planning and management. Bureaucracy is nowhere talked about in the paragraph. Means the impact of bureaucracy is not a part of the details given in the paragraph. B goes beyond the paragraph, eliminated. Come to see? In India, the management of urban areas is a local affair with a chronic problem of insufficient funds. Now, the only part where we find mention about India is in the last sentence of the paragraph, right? Only in the last sentence of the paragraph, we have mentioned about India, right? Options B and C talk about India. So to get to know whether B and C are correct or not, we need to compare these two only with that sentence, in fact. See, I'll read C once again. In India, the management of urban areas is a local affair with a chronic problem of insufficient funds. Goes beyond the paragraph. You don't find mention about this piece of information anywhere in the paragraph. C is eliminated. Ready? With high density of population and widespread poverty in urban areas, planned difficult in them. I'll read once again. With high density of population, widespread poverty in our urban areas, planned development in them is very difficult. This is also going a bit beyond the paragraph. D is also gone. Among the given options, the answer must be option A. Now our task is to go for the best one among the given ones. Come to the next question following this passage. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. I'll read the last part of the paragraph once again. Fine. The question doesn't ask us to assume based on any specific topic. I'll read the last part once again. I'll start from this part. This was because, so if you're starting with this part, we need to read the sentence coming immediately before it as well, because this particular sentence starts with a pronoun. Early universities which began to train professionals in planning spawned some of the most indigenous planners who were experts in these domains. This was because these various subjects were absorbed into the planning curriculum that has roots in social, okay, these three. Planning in India and its education differ from the West. Fine. Come to statement 1. India needs a new generation of urban professionals with knowledge relevant to modern urban practice. What is the last sentence saying? Last sentence says, planning in India and its education differ from the West. We know from the paragraph what is there in the West, right? So to India to progress, right? What is there in the West must be there in India as well. Only then India can progress. That's what we can assume. It's not given there in the paragraph. Statement 1 says, India needs a new generation of urban professionals who are trained, according to the paragraph, with knowledge relevant to modern urban practice. With knowledge relevant to modern urban practice means those professionals must be trained. So India needs a generation of urban professionals, trained who have good knowledge regarding this. That means India needs, if India has to progress, this is required. This is what we can assume from the last part. One must be considered. Based on that, B and D are eliminated. Come to option 2, statement 2. Indian universities at present have no capacity, an extreme word, or potential, have no capacity or potential to impart training in systems approach. Paragraph just tells us that. The last part of the paragraph just tells us that what is there in India differs from what is there in the West. From this, we cannot assume that Indian universities at present have no capacity or potential to impart training in such systems. Such an extreme assumption should not be made. 2 should be eliminated. The answer must be option A. Come to the next one. The next passage is also followed by 2 questions. One is a main idea question, central idea, main idea. We'll identify the topic being described in the paragraph. And the other one is an assumption-based question. This year, as you know, we came across many assumption-based questions. There were many in number. So the first one is the first question following this passage is a main idea one. We'll read the paragraph and identify the topic being described in the paragraph. Come to the paragraph. The paragraph says, not every voice on the internet commands the same kind of audience. Understand what this paragraph tells us. When anonymous private entities with high capital can pay for more space for their opinions, they're effectively buying a louder voice. So when they can pay more, they can effectively buy a louder voice. And not every voice on the internet commands the same kind of audience. If political discourse in the digital sphere is a matter of outshining one's opponent till the election is won, then the quality of politics suffers. We have a cause and effect indicator here. If is a cause and effect indicator. It must connect a reason and result. It's a conditional sentence, I should say. According to the sentence, when does the quality of politics suffer? If political discourse in the digital sphere is a matter of outshining one's opponent till the election is won, right? If this happens, the quality of politics suffers. The focus on social media is restricted to the focus of social media is restricted to the promotion of content that generates more user-based engagement, regardless of is a contrast indicator. Regardless of how inflammatory the content may be. So we have contradicting statements in the paragraph, right? It is not every voice on the internet commands the same kind of audience, right? If this happens, if you pay more, you can buy an effectively louder voice. And if this happens, the quality of politics suffers. And the last sentence also, we have a contradiction. The focus of social media is restricted to the promotion of content that generates more user engagement, regardless of how inflammatory the content may be. So we have contradicting statements in the paragraph. Come to the question. Which one of the following reflects, which one of the following statements best reflects the central idea of the above passage? Come to option A. Constructed as a marketplace of views, social media ensures instant access to information. Social media ensuring instant access to information is not a part of the details given in the paragraph. You can buy a louder voice if you pay more. It doesn't mean ensuring instant access to information is eliminated. Come to B. Social media are not ideal or moral institutions, but, contrast indicator, but the products built by companies to make profits. Those who pay more earn or buy the louder voice. And not every voice on the internet commands the same kind of audience. Statement B says, social media are not ideal or moral institutions. Yeah, because what is getting portrayed is the content of those who pay more. Social media are not ideal or moral institutions, but, contradiction, products built by companies to make profits. We have two contradicting statements in option B. And contradicting statements are there in the paragraph. Option B and the paragraph both deal with the same idea. B must be considered. Leave it. Come to option C. Social media have been created to strengthen democracies, goes beyond the paragraph. C is eliminated. Ready? In today's world, social media inevitable for well-informed social life. Social media being unavoidable or inevitable for well-informed social life is a kind of assumption, in fact. Goes beyond the paragraph, right? The answer is option D should not be considered. The answer must be option B. Sorry. So we have contradicting statements in the paragraph. The same a contradiction is found only in option B. Two contradicting statements are there connected by the contrast indicator, but the answer is B. Come to the next one. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. This is an assumption-based question, right? Fine. Now, come to the last part of the paragraph once again. I'll read the last part. The sentence starting with focus. Now here, it says, if this happens, the quality of politics suffers. The focus of social media is restricted to the promotion of content that generates more user engagement, regardless of how inflammatory the content may be. Means even though the content may be inflammatory, right? There is some restriction. Social media focus on restriction to the promotion of such content that generates more user engagement, even though such content may be exclamatory. Right? Come to, and that in fact makes politics suffer. Internet is not inclusive enough. That means it's not that broad. Yes, it is restricted. Even though the content may be exclamatory, that content is not getting promoted. That content may generate more user engagement, but that content is not promoted regardless of how inflammatory that content may be. So internet is not inclusive enough. So we can assume that as this is being done by social media, and that on internet only. Internet is being talked about in the paragraph. We can assume that internet is not inclusive enough. This goes beyond the paragraph. Assumption must be considered. One is fine. Based on that, B and D are eliminated. Number two. Internet can adversely affect the quality of politics in a country. Quality of politics is being talked about in the paragraph. It means like quality of politics suffers. That's what the paragraph tells us. Internet can adversely affect the quality of politics in a country. So what is more USA engagement is not getting promoted. Even though it is very inflammatory, it is not getting promoted. So we can assume that because of this particular action, the quality of politics in a country gets affected, and internet is a reason for it. Social media, 2 must also be considered. The answer must be option C, both 1 and 2. The next one. The next passage 2 is followed by 2 questions. One is an inferential question. The other is an assumption question. We'll read the paragraph. Inferential one means we need an option is there in the paragraph. Assumption one, as you know, something must go beyond the paragraph. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, 1/3 of food produced for human consumption is lost or wasted globally. Food is lost or wasted throughout the supply chain from initial agricultural production to final household consumption. In all these stages, food is lost or wasted throughout the supply chain. Increasing wastage also results in land degradation by about 45%. So the wastage results in this one. Land degradation by about 45%, mainly due to deforestation. And this happens mainly because of, due to is a cause and effect indicator, mainly because of deforestation, unsustainable agricultural practices, and excessive groundwater extraction, right? Mainly due to, means this happens mainly because of all these, deforestation and all. Energy spent over wasted food results in about 3.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide production every year. So the energy spent over wasted food results in this one. About 3.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide to harmful emission of other gases in the atmosphere. One line is missing, once again. A bit of a sentence is missing here. Some part of the sentence is missing here. Anyway, it's here, I'll read it. The energy spent over wasted food results in about 3.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide production every year. Decay also leads to harmful, yes. Something is missing here. Decay also leads to harmful emissions of other gases in the atmosphere. So all these start from food being lost or wasted. Addressing the loss and wastage of food in all forms is critical to complete the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability. So to complete the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability, what is required? Addressing the loss and wastage of food in all forms is required. So addressing the wastage of forms in all forms is required, is critical, is important to complete the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability. The paragraph talks about food getting lost or wasted and what are the impacts of that particular action. Come to the first question following this passage. It's an inferential one. Which of the following statements best reflect the most logical and rational inferences that can be made from the passage? Come to statement 1. The current methods of food distribution are solely responsible for the loss and wastage of food. Solely is an extreme word. Such an extreme word is nowhere there in this paragraph. One should not be, can agree to such a word if such a word is there in the paragraph. Right? Such a word is nowhere there in the paragraph. One should not be considered. Based on that, D and A are eliminated. Fine? Now we have only 2 options left, B and C. Sorry. The options are 2 and 3. Okay. Yeah, some printing mistake is there in the options. Is 1, 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3, 2 and 3, 1, 3, and 4, 1, 2, and 4. Yeah. The option C is 1, 3, and 4. Now, statement 1 is eliminated. Easily, we can eliminate 3 options. A, C, and D are gone. The answer is option B, Bombay. Now, B says 2 and 3. Right. Now, we'll see whether 2 and 3 is 2 and 3 can be derived from the paragraph or not, whether 2 and 3 are correct or not. Come to statement 2. Land productivity is adversely affected by the prevailing trend of food loss and wastage. Statement 2 is negatively charged or positively charged? Statement 2 is negatively charged. Come to the paragraph. It says, the increasing, yes, this one. The sentence, the increasing wastage also results in land degradation by about 45%, right? That means the impact is a positive one or negative one? Negative one. So land productivity is adversely affected by the prevailing trend of food loss and wastage. The paragraph is negatively charged. That sentence is negatively charged. Statement 2 is also negatively charged. 2 must be considered. The meaning also remains the same. Fine. Come to statement 3. Reduction in the loss and wastage of food results in lesser carbon footprint, right? Reduction in the loss and wastage of food results in lesser carbon footprint. The paragraph tells us that the energy spent over wasted food this one. The energy spent over wasted food results in about 3.4 billion tons of carbon dioxide production every year. That means if food is not getting wasted, right? If less amount of food gets wasted, the amount of carbon dioxide that gets produced every year will also become less. That's what 3 tells us that. That's what 3 tells us. Reduction in the loss and waste of food results in lesser carbon footprint. 3 can also be inferred from the paragraph. 3 is framed like a fact. The paragraph also is framed like a fact. Option 2 is framed like a fact. The paragraph also is framed like a fact. Inferential question, fact and fact go together. 2 is a fact. In the paragraph also it's a fact. 3 is also a fact. There also it's a fact. Fact and fact go together. 2 and 3 must be considered as inferences. Come to statement 4. Post-harvest technologies to prevent or reduce the loss or waste of food are not available. This is nowhere talked about in the paragraph. Gone. The answer is B, only 2 and 3. Fine. Come to the next one. The next question following the same passage. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Now, I'll go for the last part once again. Right? Just see whether the last part is negatively charged or positively charged. The last part of the paragraph says, addressing the loss and wastage of food in all forms is critical, important to complete the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability. The last part of the paragraph tells us that. The idea in the last part is that to complete the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability, what is required? Addressing the loss and wastage of food in all forms is required. It's critical. That means food should not be lost or food should not be wasted. To make sure that we can complete the process of the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability. Fine? Right. Come to the statements. Come to statement 1. Sorry. The food distribution mechanism needs to be reimagined and made effective to reduce the loss and wastage of food. Right? The last part of the paragraph talks about addressing the issue of food being lost or food being wasted. The food distribution mechanism needs to be reimagined and made effective to reduce the loss. To reduce the loss and wastage of food is idea in the last part, right? So we can imagine that, we can assume that if this gets done, we can ensure this, right? If this action gets done, this result can be achieved. The food distribution mechanism needs to be reimagined. This is nowhere talked about the paragraph. This goes beyond the paragraph. This is ID in the last part of the paragraph. So one must be considered as an answer to an assumption question, it cannot be an answer to an inferential one. It must be considered as an answer to an assumption question. One must be considered. So, sorry, B and D are eliminated. Come to statement 2. Ensuring the reduction of wastage and loss of food is a social and moral responsibility of all citizens. The last part of the paragraph talks about ensuring the reduction of wastage and loss of food. This idea in the last part actually, right? Ensuring the reduction of wastage and loss of food is a social and moral responsibility of all citizens. This piece of information is not given in the paragraph. This piece of information goes beyond the paragraph, So the first part of option 2, statement 2, is idea in the last part. The second part of option 2 is what we can assume from that idea. 1 and 2, both are positively charged. The last part of the paragraph is also positively charged. What should be done to complete the cycle of food sufficiency and food sustainability? Both must be considered as assumptions. The answer must be C, both 1 and 2. Fine. The next one. The next passage 2 is followed by 2 questions. One is an inferential one and the other is an assumption one. Fine. We'll read the paragraphs. We'll read the paragraph. As inflation rises, even governments previously committed to budget discipline are spending freely to help households. Higher interest rates announced by central banks are supposed to help produce model fiscal austerity, because to maintain stable debts while paying more to borrow, government must cut spending or raise taxes. Without a fiscal backup, monetary policy eventually loses traction. High interest rates become inflationary, not disinflationary, because they simply lead governments to borrow more to pay rising debt service costs. The risk of monetary unmooring is greater when public debt rises, because interest rates become more important to budget deficits. The first question following this passage: which of the following statements best reflect or reflects the most logical and rational inference or inferences that can be made from this passage? Fine. Come to statement 1. Central banks cannot bring down, it's an extreme word. You cannot do it, I cannot do it. This something that's extreme. Central banks cannot bring down inflation without budgetary backing, right? So without budgetary backing, central banks cannot bring down inflation. This is what statement 1 tells us. Come to the paragraph once again. The second sentence. Higher interest rates announced by central banks are supposed to, right, are supposed to help produce model fiscal austerity, because to maintain stable debts while paying more to borrow, governments must cut spending or raise taxes. Here, higher interest rates are announced by central banks. I mean, central banks are announcing higher interest rates. Higher interest rates announced by central banks are supposed to help produce modest fiscal austerity. That means these are supposed to do this action, right? That means their duty is to do it. They're supposed to do it means their responsibility, their obligation, or their duty is to do this one, right? But it does not mean that central banks cannot bring down inflation without budgetary backing. They're supposed to do it. If they're supposed to do it means their duty is to do it. It doesn't mean that budgetary backing cannot be brought down by central banks without budgetary backing inflation cannot be brought down by central banks without budgetary backing. The paragraph just tells us that they are supposed to, their duty or their obligation is to help produce modest fiscal austerity. That is your obligation. It doesn't mean that if it doesn't happen, inflation cannot be brought down by central banks. The meanings are completely different. Such an extreme word is not there. One should not be agreed to. As per my understanding of the paragraph, one should not be agreed to. So I eliminate A and C. You may have a confusion between options A and C actually, but I don't agree to statement 1. Come to statement 2. The effects of monetary policy depend on the fiscal policies. The effects of monetary policy depend on the fiscal policies pursued by the government. The paragraph tells us that. The sentence starting with without. Without the physical backup, monetary policy eventually loses traction, right? So to make sure that monetary policy doesn't lose traction, what must be there? Physical backup must be there, right? That means fiscal policies depend on without the physical backup, monetary policy eventually loses traction. That means to make sure that monetary policy doesn't lose traction, what must be there? Fiscal backup must be there. That means monetary policy depends on fiscal backup. That's the meaning of the sentence. Statement 2 says, the effects of monetary policy depend on the fiscal policies pursued by the government. The same meaning. Statement 2 is framed like a fact. There also, it is framed like a fact. Fact and fact go together. 2 is completely fine. I go for option B as the answer. Sorry. Fine. Some might have gone for C, but I don't agree to statement 1. It should not be agreed to because the meaning is different. They are supposed to do it. It doesn't mean that without them, it cannot happen. The next one. This question also follows the same passage. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. This is an assumption-based question. Fine? Right. I'll read the last part of the paragraph once again. The risk of monetary unmooring is greater when public debt rises because interest rates become more important to budget deficits. Fine. Come to statement 1. We need the idea in the last part to be there in the options, right? Come to 1. Fiscal policies of governments are solely responsible for higher prices. Such an extreme assumption should not be made. 1 is eliminated. A and C are gone. Number 2. Come to statement 2. Higher prices do not affect the long-term government bonds, right? Higher prices do not affect the long-term government bonds. This one doesn't go with the last part of the paragraph. In fact, what I feel is in a way contradicting the paragraph. 2 also should not be considered. The answer is D, neither one, not. Come to the next one. This passage is followed by only one question. We'll read the question and we'll read the paragraph accordingly. Which one of the following statements best reflects the most logical and rational message conveyed by the above passage? This is a question based on a message. If it is a question based on a message, a suggestion or a piece of advice, we need to focus on the last sentence actually. Understand what the idea in the last sentence is. Now, as you know, we write an essay also, same as the case. In the case of essay too, what do we want to convey? The message we want to convey, the advice we want to give, the suggestion we want to put forward, we go for in the last sentence of the essay, in fact. I'll read the paragraph and we will focus on the message. What message we'll try to understand what message the authors trying to convey. I'll read the paragraph. You may read along with me. Unlike religion, it must be positively judged, right? Unlike religion and science, poetry does not posit or expect any belief in absolute truths. Those forces or individuals who claim to have absolute truths in their grasp tend to turn dictatorial or and tyrannical. Truth usually does not admit any contradictions or imperfections. It is Unitarian. It is therefore not of much use for poetry. Right? Poetry is, now, from what we have understood from reading up to here, poetry is unlike religion and science. Contradiction. There's a contradiction between poetry, religion, and science. Poetry and then religion and science. I take religion and science as one entity, poetry as the other entity. So poetry contradicts religion and science. Poetry abides by the plurality of life and existence. Perhaps poetry follows reality which is plural, anachronistic, full of contradictions. Against the tyranny of truth, poetry remains a partisan of democratic reality. Against the arrogance of power, wealth, and hierarchy, poetry proposes both humility and defiance. Right? Fine. Defiance means like going against, resisting. Humility and defiance. Defiance must be taken as a positive word here. Humility means being very humble. And is a support indicator, must connect either two positive ideas or two negative ideas. Here, and is connecting to positive ideas, right? So according to the paragraph, religion and science are portrayed in a bit negative manner, the paragraph in fact, and poetry, whereas poetry is portrayed in a positive manner. The last part of the paragraph, I'll read once again. Against the tyranny of truth, poetry remains a partisan of democratic reality. Fine. Poetry remains a partisan of democratic reality. That is one idea. One more is that against the arrogance of power, wealth, and hierarchy, poetry proposes both humility and defiance. Right? Fine. So we have contradictions in the last part. Right? Against. Right? Contradiction is there. One contradiction is. One contradiction happens with the tyranny of truth. The other contradiction happens with the arrogance of power, wealth, and hierarchy. Fine. Which one of the following statements best reflects the most logical and rational message conveyed by the above passage? Fine. Come to option A. It is the poetry, not science or religion, which recognizes and accepts imperfections in humans. Right? The paragraph, the mention about imperfections in humans comes in the middle of the paragraph. Truth usually does not admit any contradictions or imperfections, right? There's only part where we have mentioned about imperfections. This idea does not find, the idea in statement 1, it is a poetry, not science or religion, which recognizes and accepts imperfections in humans. This idea does not find mention anywhere in the last sentence or the last part of the paragraph. Should not be considered an answer to a question based on a message. A is eliminated. The last part, we have two contradictions brought about. Number B. Option B says, truth is revealed through science or religion, and poetry is an anathema to truth. Nowhere talked about in the paragraph or anywhere in the last part. B is eliminated. Come to see. Poetry is romantic, imaginary, and is about feeling. Whereas science and religion are about truth. We have a contradiction brought about in option C. Poetry is romantic, imaginary, and is about feeling, whereas contrast indicator, science and religion are about truth. Fine, leave it. Don't get stuck. Come to option D. In a world of violence, tyranny, and bigotry, poetry is a form of dynamic resistance, right? I can, in fact, agree to C and D, but we can go for only one option. The last part says, against the tyranny of truth, poetry remains a partisan of democratic reality. Against the arrogance of power, wealth, and hierarchy, poetry proposes both humility and defiance. So poetry remains a partisan of democratic reality. Poetry proposes both humility and defiance. This is what the last part of the paragraph tells us. Now we'll see which of these two options, C and D, which of these two options contains mention about the idea talked about in the last part. D says, in a world of violence, the arrogance of power, wealth, and hierarchy, right? Tyranny of truth, fine. In a world of violence, tyranny, and bigotry, poetry is a form of dynamic resistance, right? poetry is a form of dynamic resistance. The last part says, poetry proposes, and poetry is a form of, proposes both humility and defiance. Defiance is the same as resistance. And it's a dynamic one because poetry proposes it, right? So poetry in a world of violence, tyranny and bigotry, poetry is a form of dynamic resistance, must be considered. C says, poetry is romantic, imaginary, and is about feeling, whereas science and religion are about truth. Poetry being romantic, imaginary, and about feeling, and about being about feeling is not talked about in the last part of the paragraph. So one that goes more with the last part is D. I'll go for option. Fine. Come to the next one. There's only one question following this passage, and it is an assumption-based question. Fine. We'll read the paragraph. The flower was not invented to please us. It flaunted its petals and spread its perfume to attract an insect. The insect carries the pollen from flower to flower so that pollen is not carried away by wind and thus not wasted. What we call a flower's beauty is merely a byproduct and a human invention. The perfume is not there to please us. It pleases us because it is there and we have been conditioned to. So perfume is not there to please us. It pleases us because it is there and we have been conditioned to it, used to it, or we have got adjusted to it. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. The last part of the paragraph is positively charged. A positive statement, we can make a positive assumption. The same way from a negative statement, we can make a negative assumption. Now from when something positive happens, we assume something positive. When something negative happens, the same as the case, we assume something negative. Come to statement 1, assumption 1. The author of the passage believes that flowers are creations of nature's luxury, right? So what the author believes is, what the author believes is, flowers are creations of nature's luxury. Right? The last part says, the perfume is what we call a flower's beauty is merely a byproduct and a human invention. The perfume is not there to please us. It's not there to please us. It pleases us because cause and effect indicator. I'm sorry. Yeah. It pleases us because cause of indicator. It pleases us because it is there and we have been conditioned to it positively. This idea in the last part of the passage. Statement 1 says, the author of the passage believes that flowers are creations of nature's luxury. Yes, because it pleases us. And because it is there, it pleases us because it is there. That means it has been created by nature. And we have been conditioned to it. We have got conditioned to what nature has created, in fact. So we can assume that the author believes that flowers are creations of nature.